Hi, today we'd like to welcome Esther to our podcast and YouTube videos. But I'm going to Esther introduce herself because I'm sure there's a lot of things Esther does and is involved in that I don't know about. And you've been in OT for almost as long as I have, right?
I've been in OT for a while. Actually, I was practicing as an OT for 12 years. And I worked specifically with geriatrics and mostly 98% in neurological. So anything having to do with head injury, trauma, dementia, Alzheimer's, all of that stuff. And in that time, I learned a lot about being human and what is being human. And as an OT, you don't always just deal with the patient, you also deal with the families as well. I mean, it comes as a package. So I did that for many years. And then I went into the field as an older person. I think I was the oldest person in my class, or maybe second oldest. But anyway, after it got a little too heavy to do the lifting and all that work, I had already been teaching. I'd already been providing education, continuing ed courses, and that got me into the internet. And so my next career was then internet marketing, anything having to do with the internet, which I was just fascinated by. I was so blown away when I was doing research for one of my continuing ed courses where I could go on a forum, back when forums were around, go back on a forum and I could get information from an OT in Australia or an OT in New Zealand or Switzerland. And I can't believe this. It was amazing to me. So I fell in love with everything having to do with the net. So I did that. I ended up doing an internet marketing company for 25 years, which I'm proud to say many of my clients are with me for over 20 years. But I knew that at one point when I retired, that I was going to, let go of that company and move on to something else. And I thought, well, what about combining OT and internet marketing? So I started blogging, and that was seniorsafetyadvice.com. That's how that got started back when I was 60, thinking, all right, when I'm 65, that website will be going and things will be happening. And that's exactly what happened. I'm 68 now. So, but what I'm doing now is way more than I thought I was going to do because the end result of having seniorsafetyadvice.com was that I got so many emails from the readers saying, well, where do I find these people? What is an OT? Where do I find an OT? Where do I find a PT? Where do I find people to do ramps or bathroom remodels, or what's an aging in place specialist, and so on and so on? What's a geriatric care manager, and so on. So, because I was writing about all of these services, and I couldn't believe how difficult it was to find these people because they're scattered all over the place. And
Mhm.
so I created another website, Aging in Place Directory, to try to bring everybody together, not only for the reader, so that I just want to make sure my mic, not only for the reader, so that they could find the resources they need in their area, but another thing I found also was that a lot of these professionals weren't necessarily talking to each other or working together, which you and I both know when you go in to see a patient or a client, they need way more than what you can give them. I mean, you have your specialty, but then there's other specialties as well. So you need to walk in with that. I think you need to walk in with that Rolodex of all these services. So that's the second component of that, of being part of that directory, is connecting with others. And then because these days, so many people, what I'm finding is that so many are going into the aging in place niche as a secondary or tertiary career. Either they want to do something like me while they're, retired and they want to apply their skills to it, or they got laid off, or, whatever. They are going into this niche, but they've never done a business before. So that's where I'm giving them the members of the directory, the pro members get webinars on how to market, how to use AI, because AI is everywhere, right? How to use all these tools, how to do whatever it is you need to do to promote yourself and to give your clients the best possible service that you can.
Yeah, we have
So
some similar things that way with training the OT specifically and home safety assessments and their business that way. But then how did
exactly.
that get you into the Stoic caregiver? I
So
mean,
yeah, so then a year ago, a friend of mine gave me a book about Stoicism. And I have to admit, I had heard of Stoicism, but I didn't really know much about it. So I started reading it. And as I'm reading this book, I mean, I am remembering all the my patients, and I mean, I remember them anyway, but I remember their families and the struggles that they went through and what I went through myself, with my own mother and what my friends are now going through. And it's just like these lessons totally apply to a family caregiver. So I looked, I researched, I didn't see anything about a Stoic caregiver book or webinar or anything about that. So I wrote the Stoic Caregiver. So I found 60 quotes or paraphrases or lessons that I could apply to family caregiving. And then I thought, well, 60 is a lot, to absorb. So I broke them down. I have 3 books. Each one is volume 1, 2, and 3, and each one has 20 lessons. But you can also go to the stoiccaregiver.com and I have it in PDF format, either in 20 lessons or if you want the whole shebang in 60 lessons. But then from that, now I also have the Stoic Caregiver podcast, where every Friday I give a lesson on the Stoic lesson and how it applies to family caregiving. It's really been fascinating because, we all know that most family caregivers get thrown into it, right? It's not like you plan, August 11th, I'm going to be doing this. It just happens overnight sometimes, most of the times. So it's obviously, you can't change what's happening, but you can change how you react to what's happening.
so
And you can
yeah.
let go of what you cannot control. And those two main ideas are the main gist of Stoicism.
Okay, that's
And
what I was going to ask you if you can explain like the key concept of Stoicism, particularly for therapists who we probably haven't heard of that in our OT training, right? So
exactly.
what are the key principles there that you see related to that?
Yeah, those are the 2 key principles. One, you can't control everything. So learning to let go of what you cannot control, and then learning how to control what you can control. And then realizing that, okay, things happen, but now how am I going to react to what happened? Can't change the thing that happened, but you can change your reaction to it. I mean, Stoicism is really based on these Stoics, these individuals from thousands of years ago. And Marcus Aurelius is the most famous one. But I quote 3 of them, Seneca and Epictetus, in the books. And I take their lessons, and all those are taken from letters and journals and everything that they've written thousands of years ago. And then, of course, apply them to today. But it makes sense, right? As an OT, and as helping a family caregiver get over the emotional issues that they're dealing with mom, dad, uncle, aunt, whatever, and then
Mhm.
also the patient themselves. But it's mostly the family caregivers that can learn how to um, take these lessons and apply them to themselves, because so many family caregivers end up giving up their life for the other person's life. And we can say it 100 times. The oxygen mask goes on you first. You can't pour from an empty cup. I mean, those are the phrases that are repeated in almost every caregiver book that you read. And they're true. They're very true. But when you hear something so many times, it tends to get like lost, or you just don't hear it anymore. So I'm hoping that throwing a different angle at those exact same lessons, but with different phrases and different viewpoints or perspectives, that it will help the family caregivers.
When I'm working with OTs who are working in home mods, we do a lot with caregivers and supporting caregivers, often as much or more than clients. But I'm just thinking, how specifically would we see that philosophy showing up in every day? Because I'm thinking about it, we're coming in looking at the external environment often, but we should also
Correct.
be considering the internal and the emotional factors. And it seems to me that that's where Stoicism may have a place and how we could relate that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, absolutely. You're right. Most OTs are trained to look at the external environment, alter the environment to match the person, right? But if you do home health or if you're walking into an environment where the family is there as well and they're caregiving, oftentimes, if you look over and look close enough to the daughter, it's usually a daughter, but it could be a daughter, son, whomever is taking care of that person. They may look exhausted. They may look frustrated. They may be completely scattered. They don't know where to start, what to do. They are overwhelmed with what's happening. Maybe they're even arguing now with their spouse because they're spending so much time now in this environment, or they've let go of their hobbies, or their friends, they're just down, depressed. They're in a new environment emotionally that they are not familiar with and they don't know what to do with. So Stoicism in the concept of letting go, it's okay, here you are in this situation. You can't control what happened to mom, let's say. You can't control she had a stroke or whatever, all that. But you can control how you're going to be with mom. Does it mean you have to be with her 24/7? No. You look for respite care. You make a date night with your spouse, whatever. You continue one or two of your volunteer activities. You learn to take the time for yourself so that you can give the best time for that person you're caring for. Because, if you're exhausted and depressed, resentful, angry, whatever, you're not going to be able to take care of that person very well at all. And do they deserve that? Well, I don't know. Maybe they shouldn't deserve that, but the caregiver has to put themselves first. And Stoicism helps you to see, I think it helps you to see the situation outside of the emotion. You
It's
know,
it,
it,
it
go
Yeah,
ahead,
it's
go ahead.
interesting because I keep thinking of it. Okay, we're OT doing a home safety or a home modification assessment, right? We start by cataloging the hazards, loose rugs, poor lighting, inaccessible bathrooms. Those things we're entirely within our control to fix. But when we think about it, the caregivers face a parallel list of things that are not fixable. Like we've got a progressive diagnosis, parents' resistance to change, spouses' declining memories. So, how do you think we could then help caregivers build their own version of a home safety audit that looks at the emotional and psychological environment? So, separating what's modifiable to what simply must be accepted. Like, do you think that's part of what we could and should be doing in that process?
I do, beginning to set the boundaries of what can be done and, for both parties, not just the families, but yeah, that would be a very, very good addition to the physical part of the assessment is then an analysis of how the family, not just that one person caregiver, but how, if there are more family, of course, but how that family can tackle the situation and how to help the single person who usually becomes the main caregiver. How can she or he handle the rest of the family? Because oftentimes, one person ends up being the main caregiver and the other siblings walk away. They either live away but there's always things that they can do to help. And if there is no other family, then what are the resources around you that you can connect to? And of course, always connecting to other family caregivers who are in the same situation so that you can learn from each other. One of the quotes that I really like from volume one is by Epictetus, and it says, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." Because I think part of the grief that families go through, that the caregivers go through, and it is grief. I mean,
Hmm.
without a doubt, is that you're wishing your parent to be the way they were, but
Hmm.
trying to avoid what they are. Not avoid, but not accepting it, maybe.
A little bit
So
of
I think
denial too.
resisting that acceptance makes it so much harder, so much harder. So that's what I mean by, realizing the situation and okay, I can't change that situation, but I can change how I'm going to react to it. I always say, be grateful for what people can give you and don't blame them for what they cannot. Just accept what they can give you and work in that little world. Sort of like when
It's
you're working with someone with dementia, you have to enter their world and you have to speak in their language and be with them at that moment. You cannot expect them to come to your world.
It's
It's
interesting because I think about it in terms of, as an OT, we go in there and we do a functional assessment and we measure what they can still do, right? We
right.
think about what they can do, dressing, bathing, transferring, not what they've lost because we're looking it's there. And so that stoic temperance is often described as moderation or right measure rather than restriction. So now I think that's kind of a virtue we're looking at. How does that
Yeah,
show up with the caregivers to recalibrate their expectations, week
exactly.
by week without overestimating, which is risking injury, or underestimating, which is kind of stripping dignity or independence. So,
Ex-
you know,
Exactly.
what practical tools can you think of that the therapist could use or have that would help with the caregiver recalibrating those expectations and that stoic temperance value?
Well, that's why in the book I wanted to talk about the quote or the phrase, and then I wanted to explain that in simple English, what that actually means for the caregiver. And then what I did is I added a series of practical tips. So for instance, for the quote that I gave you, you could say something. One of the tips is, allow yourself to grieve the life that you expected to have, grandma, grandpa for another 5 years, whatever. And just walk to get, grief and acceptance are not opposites, they walk together. So these are like just little mentions, I guess, little tidbits to think about and to contemplate. And then I gave some reflections of, what aspect of caregiving, the person can think about what aspect of caregiving situation have I been resisting accepting, to think about it, to write about it, because the book, these books are also journals where you have space to write, and then an affirmation which you can say, based on that one issue, because each book is 20 lessons, but it may be that you respond very well at this moment to 3 lessons. So then you're going to expand on those 3 lessons. You're going to repeat them over and over again, the affirmations, the reflections, whatever. And then maybe next month, 2 other lessons come into play because, as you say, usually the illnesses are chronic and they continue to progress. So the situation is always going to change, month to month, year to year. And that's part of it also. But I think from the OT perspective, that's another thing. I thought Stoicism was very OT.
Mm-hmm.
so, so I thought, from the OT perspective, I think it would be fine to create, I don't know, meditation tapes, meditation YouTube videos for the caregiver to access, workbooks, you know, uh, checklists, that they're taking care of themselves. Have you taken 20 minutes today for yourself? Have, whatever the checklist would be, depending on the lesson. But I think that should be part of the assessment, not only of, as you say, not only of the patient, the client, but also of the family that's there. And of course, every family is going to be different, every single family. So I don't know that there is a generic workbook or checklist for each person. There might be, I don't know, but it would be worth trying, especially these days with with the use of AI to help you outline and figure things out, and write it down, and then you go in and edit and reformat and all of that. It's so much easier than just picking up a blank piece of paper and starting from there.
Yeah, that's interesting because we make recommendations on the physical level, the grab bars, the stair lifts, or wheelchair ramps, or whatever, to measure that physical decline, but it's just a physical moving through the space, right? And the changes. Um, you really thinking about it on that Stoic parallel is really like, how do we move through it emotionally? How do we navigate that space from that other perspective, which impacts us all? And it's all kind of that practical applied wisdom, right? So it's rather
Right.
than just a compliance or a Medicare covered checklist, it's really navigating that journey. And I know, back in the 90s, we were talking a lot about the different streams of clinical reasoning and
Hmm.
thinking about pragmatic components, which is the practical, but we're talking about the emotional and the narrative life story components, and working
Right.
those in, it seems to me.
Right, exactly. It's going back to that because the health of the patient, I mean, we're all concerned about the health of the patient, right? We walk in and that's why we're doing the physical assessments to help them live as independent as possible for as long as possible. But oftentimes, the other component, the people who are caring for this patient, they are also involved in the equation as well. They can't and they shouldn't be ignored. Now, what's happening that I hear a lot from family caregivers as now I've got all these podcasts and YouTube videos and websites. So I get emails every day from family caregivers who are struggling. And what I hear from them is they don't know where to go. They don't know where to start. So what I'm encouraging the members of the Aging in Place Directory website and everyone, all OTs, everyone that walks into someone's home, an aging person's home, to assess them physically, to provide a piece of equipment, whatever it is, they should have a Rolodex of services that are available in the community for that person and for the caregiver. So if there are support groups, there's no reason why the OT can't give a list of support groups for the family caregiver, for stroke or Parkinson's or COPD, whatever the issue may be. There's no reason why the OT shouldn't also have a list of resources of contractors or interior designers or, aging in place specialists, anyone at all who can provide the services that they need to help
Well,
the family to guide them. This is
well,
what's here. Yeah.
it's also, I mean, one of the things about providing a service for your community, in every community, it's going to look very different because each
Right.
community is different. And we need
Exactly.
to think about it from that local level. So knowing
Ex
your community, knowing what's in there and the resources should be part, it's what we encourage in our Home Safety Pros group and in our chat courses and in even our networking and marketing things, is that that's part of how you get referrals and how you serve clients and how you serve your community. So
exactly.
having those available is really key. And I think also thinking, it's usually such a superficial assessment often that therapists do, and they're not thinking about it from the terms of the occupation and all the components, the person and all of their components. And if we're just coming in and assessing the physical only, technically speaking, if we're not looking at the occupation and that client individually, that could just be done by a contractor, but it's not going to be as effective. And the research demonstrates it's nowhere near as effective as when the OT's there. But
Yeah.
now, even without measuring or naming what the OT contribution is, we're showing in the research that when an OT is there and does this, we also reduce some of the stressors and stuff with the caregiver, whether it's the physical stress or the emotional stress. But if we were even more explicit about that component,
Yes.
thinking about how much more we could make that change, right?
Yes. Exactly, exactly. And it's coming from a professional. It's coming from an occupational therapist who is aware of what is in that community. you know, and um, and on the business side of it, it's also a branding issue. Because if the occupational therapist is walking in and handing a workbook, even if it's a printable PDF, whatever it is, or checklist, it's got her name on it or his name on it, contact information. It's a branding product that, and if you treat 10 patients in the same area, you may be able, or you should be able to use a lot of those same resources. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean a referral. These are three contractors that you can call and you can decide. They are
Right.
trained in,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. I'm not
We
saying
absolutely
that you recommended so and so,
we
because, there's
absolutely
liability issues
Yeah,
there.
we absolutely
Yeah.
teach that too with our chat course. It's like you don't
Yeah.
want to take on that responsibility, but
No,
I do have a handout that we provide with the caregivers and the clients on how to choose a good contractor, what to ask
exactly.
for, and what to do. So there's
Right.
those pieces. Absolutely, there's that. And it's just even the emotional components of it. Like I know when we're talking about home mods, often we see things like we label it resistance to some of the recommendations because it visibly signals decline. And I even went with a friend yesterday, her husband has dementia, and to look at different living situations. So, maybe an independent living facility that's near a whole retirement complex that has all different levels of care.
Yeah.
And when we left, she said to me, it's a really interesting recognition that I'm getting older and we're getting older, you
Yeah.
know? And so there's
Yeah.
all these emotional components
Of
to it,
course.
right?
Of
And
course. I mean, I think that's one of the blocks I speak to so many OTs and PTs and aging in place professionals who tell me how difficult it is to get clients. And I said, well, think about it. It's emotional. You're basically, blaring out to them that they're getting older and they need this, and people don't want to admit that. And here in the US, the other side of the coin is that it's also financial. Now you're recommending all of these changes in tools and equipment, and insurance doesn't pay for it, Medicare doesn't pay for it, so money has to come out of their pockets. So now they're like, well, I'm not that old, and I don't really need that shower chair. And what? I have to pay $100 for that shower? No, I don't need that yet, until they
well,
need it. It,
yeah, I
yeah,
mean, and we don't tend to react until there's an emergency, right? Instead of
exactly.
planning ahead. It was interesting because I just in one of my blogs, I just did something about we get super excited about baby proofing a home,
I know.
right? And I
I
don't know if
know.
you read my blog about that, but then it was
I,
like, can we get excited about age proofing a
I
home because
know.
it symbolizes something else that could be great if
I
we look
know.
at that? But and I think that's that stoic piece of that as well, right?
Yeah,
Because we're thinking
yeah,
about, well, we can't change it. I mean, if we don't get old, what else is the option?
right.
And so,
Exactly.
how do we enjoy this process? And that was what I was talking to my friend last night about.
Right,
It's like, how do you set yourself up for you can't change these things, but what is the best way now you can enjoy this process, that you
right.
can reduce your stressors? You're not having to do yard work on 2 acres. You're not having to do all this house maintenance. But so now you can go meet with your friends because your
Ex
husband can have care.
ex
All of those things, I
right,
think.
right.
Right.
It's the acceptance,
Yes.
accepting the change, and then not focusing on what is being lost or, done, but now what you can do instead.
It's
Other
interesting
new
because
things. It's acceptance. Yeah.
yeah, it's acceptance, and it's interesting because we talk about caregiver burnout, and if we look at people who are providing extensive levels of caregiver care, in fact, they can die sooner than the person they're taking care for. It
Yes.
increases the thing, and so when we talk about burnout, it's not from one crisis, right? It's all this
No.
accumulation.
Right.
And you've written about 1,000 small moments rather than a single catastrophic event.
Yes,
So when you look at that, you've got journaling, morning premeditation, evening review, and I mean, I think some of even religious practices definitely help here. We know that within some of the studies of aging, like the blue zones and things like that.
sure.
But what ones of those have you found that actually change the trajectory of burnout rather than just temporarily relieving it
The
or
journaling.
hiding it?
Yeah, the journaling. Definitely writing it down. Doesn't have to be in the evening if the evening isn't in your biorhythm, whatever time, but journaling definitely. The evening, of course, makes sense because then you're journaling about that day. How did you feel? You know what? And I think also, I think that has been the most effective for not only for family care, not only for the caregivers, but also for most anybody that is going through, let's face it, a traumatic event. Caregiving for someone that you love, watching your mother slowly die, basically, or aging, or becoming someone that you don't recognize,
Mhm.
it's traumatic. And of course, it has all levels of grief, everything. Um, but journaling can definitely help you to take all of that that's running in your head that you're ruminating over and over and over again and put it out on paper and see it for what it is. So that's why I wanted to make these books a workbook. The next book that I'm working on, there are 3 volumes of this Stoic lessons, but the next one is a devotional for the caregivers. So I'm working on that part now, and hopefully I can make it like a daily devotional. But what I want people to understand about Stoicism is that it's not about managing, tasks better or managing the day better. It's really just a framework for creating the endurance that you need to survive the day. That's really what it is how do you relate to the suffering? How do you relate to the uncertainty? Because the other thing that I think is so hard for family caregivers is they don't know how long they're going to be in it. It could be a month, it could be 10 years. They don't know. And that's what makes everything so um, bleak. It seems so bleak. Like, where's the end to this tunnel? Um, but I
Or
think,
what the changes are going to be in
and
that phase, right? Because
and
it
that
can,
as well. Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, right now, your mom can stand up and walk to the bathroom with her walker. Maybe a year from now, she can't do that anymore. And maybe after that, she's bed. I mean, you just don't know. You
yeah.
don't know. And that uncertainty is frightening sometimes. And you
It,
you feel like you can't get on with your life. You're stuck. You're trapped.
Mhm.
I took care of my husband for many years before he passed away. And what I realized after he passed away was that I had kind of lost myself, and I didn't really know where. I'll remember the moment I was making scrambled eggs one morning after he passed away. And I'm making these scrambled eggs, and I'm thinking to myself, he loved scrambled eggs, and I'm making them, and I'm like, I don't even like scrambled eggs. Do I like scrambled eggs? It had been so long that I had thought about myself and what I needed and wanted that I just lost myself. And I think that happens so often to family caregivers. And to your point of when family caregivers get sick, they often do during the process. But oftentimes, once that loved one has passed away, the aging parent or whomever, they themselves then get sick. A very good friend of mine took care of her mother for over a year, took care of her father immediately after that for 3, 4 years. A month after that, she ended up with breast cancer. Why? Because she wasn't going to get
The-
what she needed to get right, because she's so involved in taking care. And that
well,
is,
we think about the repeated sleep,
yes,
the lack of sleep, the stress, the thing, and I think again, we think about caregiver burnout, and I'm thinking now about adding this, but it's almost like when we do the home modification assessment or the home safety assessment, we should be thinking about measuring it and talking about it as part of the process because it's really the whole part of that dynamic, right?
it is.
And and thinking about then how we can incorporate some of the tools that you're talking about from Stoicism into the recommendations, because we often just think about, well, now we can reduce the physical load, but we haven't talked about that emotional and psychosocial component, which we have some of the skills to address, but we tend to ignore a lot because
Yeah.
it's more complicated or
It is
seems to be.
complicated. Yeah, and it's very different with each caregiver because
Yeah.
you don't know the relationship between that caregiver and the parent. It could have been toxic for all you know. It could be loving for all you know. It's going to be different each time, of course. And then you don't know the caregiver situation. Are they married? Are they single? Do they have three, children of their own? Do they have a career? What is going on in their world? What have they had to give up in order to do this? But I had a thought and it flew right out of my head. But what I was thinking of was that I think it's caregiver training. That was the thought. I think part of the OT assessment should or could include some form of caregiver training. And that's basically what this is. And yeah, I know we do caregiver training, like how to lift, how to
Yes, but that's,
transfer,
yeah,
how
that's what I
to,
was just talking about. Yeah, we missed this other part.
yeah, now there's the other part of it of, okay, now you know what to do for mom. What can you do for yourself? Because that has to play a part of it. And that's where I think there's this missing gap. So yeah, by providing the resources in the community, by providing, if the OT wanted to create their own meditation tapes or YouTube video, that would be certainly be something that they could provide, by referring to giving a list of contractors or whomever, whatever it is needed, DME,
Respite carers or caregiver
what
agencies or, yeah.
anything, yeah, outdoor landscaping work, durable medical equipment, I don't know, whatever is needed for that particular situation, environment. Maybe they even need realtors. Maybe they need something to move someplace smaller, whatever it is. I think that you've already walked in there. You've already started gaining the trust of this family. So why not be the Rolodex for that family to provide them what they need? Why not?
Interesting, because there's a thing from Seneca, right? Wrote about premeditatio malorum. Is it rehearsing difficulties in advance so it doesn't ambush you? And
Yes.
I've done a little bit of that with caregivers, but thinking about how to translate that practice for caregivers that are facing progressive or terminal diagnosis, rehearsing the hard road ahead to build resilience, but not tipping them into anticipatory grief, despair, depression.
Right.
Where's the line? Is that something you talk about in the Stoicism principles?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. It's again, it's acceptance, accepting what is happening, but without um, focusing on the grief part, the terrible part. Oh my God, my mom just had a stroke. It's really bad. She can't speak. She can't, on and on. Instead of focusing on what that person is not able to do, accept what happened. But now, what are some things that you can do with her? And instead of saying, to the caregiver, think about the things that you still can do with her, and then leaving it at that. No, you need to actually give the things. Here is a great puzzle that you and she can work on together. Here are some books that you can buy that you can put photographs in. You can work on that together. Making the actual physical hand holding kind of recommendations to help them see, oh, that's what you mean by doing things with them. Otherwise, they're just going to put them, I've seen caregivers put their elderly
Mhm.
parents in front of the TV and saying, well, that's what I can do with them. I said, no, that's not exactly what I meant.
Yeah, and part of it is lack of knowledge. Part of it is
Yes,
exhaustion and so many other things to do as well. And so that's kind of part of this.
right.
Um,
Right,
with
because
it,
now not only are they the daughter, they're the nurse, they're the attorney, they're the home maintenance person. They've taken on all of this on top of whatever life they had. That's why
yeah,
sometimes a lot of marriages break apart because they give that up, and you can't do that. You
Or the
cannot do that.
spouse whose roles change from now being spouse and shared decision maker to I'm now caregiver and having to do that on my own. And that's kind of the thing when we're looking at particularly chronic and progressive conditions, right? It really brings that sustained confrontation with things that are outside of our control. And
Yeah.
that really is that whole section of circle of control that you've talked about for that long haul caregiving. The dichotomy of control is really easy to state, but very hard to live, especially when
Yes.
outside of your control includes like your parents' or spouse's cognition, your spouse's
Yes.
pain, or unpredictable disease, which we just talked about then. But can you walk through a real specific example from your own caregiving experience where you had to consciously practice letting go of an outcome you desperately wanted to control?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you my own experience with my mother. My mother was born and raised in Italy, and she lived there through World War II. So obviously, she had a lot of trauma in her life, and she was a very, her phrase was always, "I live under a dark cloud." She was always on the negative. If we used to joke that if she had won the lottery, the only thing she would be complaining about is that she had to pay taxes on it. Never mind the fact that she won the lottery. Yeah, that's just how she was. So as she got older, got this what I call the more so disease. She just became more so of that type of person. So it was very difficult to deal with her. Couldn't tell her anything. She wouldn't do anything that, everybody was dumb, everybody was stupid. And it was a very difficult situation during that last year of her life. So what I had to do in that instance is, all right, and I got this training mostly, maybe Stoicism is so connected to me because of all my work with, head injury and head trauma, is that I learned that in that stage of my life that I couldn't do, I couldn't make this person what I wanted them to be. I couldn't make
Mhm.
them, so I learned that I just have to back off, let this person be whatever they are. But at the same time, I have to protect myself. These aren't insults to me. These are just insults out of fear and out of anger and whatever is going on in that person's brain. I
Mhm.
don't know what neurons aren't firing. I have no idea. But whatever is happening in there, I can't fix it. But I can make the environment as comfortable as possible. I can make the situation as comfortable as possible. But if I can't, that's when you walk away. That's at least that's how it was for me. I have an interesting story from my when I was an OT. I was a brand new OT, maybe a month or so, I don't know. And I got this patient. I was in a head injury unit, and I got this patient, great patient, and I he had had a severe head injury, and I was working with him on teaching him how to tie his shoelaces and teaching him how to tie his shoelaces. And I worked on it week after week after week, and nothing was clicking. I just couldn't get him to do it. And at the time, Velcro shoes were coming into fashion or whatever, where you just flip the
Yeah.
Velcro. So my supervisor said, Esther, at some point you have to realize it's not going to happen. It's not the time for him to learn to do that. So I looked at her and I said, oh, so I need to go Velcro. She goes, yes, you need to go Velcro. So from then on, I have used that phrase when I come into a difficult situation and whatever I'm trying to get that person to do or to learn, and they can't do it, I have to remember, okay, Esther, you have to go Velcro. Whatever that Velcro is, whatever the thing is that's easier, or just letting it go, or whatever. So that I think parlays very easily into Stoicism.
It's interesting because there's also that concept of justice, right? One of the four cardinal virtues. And it's really about the right relationship and fairness, including fairness to yourself. And
Exactly.
we talked about caregivers frequently sacrificing their own health, finances, and relationships in service of a loved one. And sometimes to a degree that's not sustainable or even helpful long term. So,
Right.
how does Stoic justice help a caregiver set boundaries without guilt, especially in a culture, and particularly for women, that equates self-sacrifice with virtue?
It's true. And guilt, I think, is the number one, I don't know, killer. I don't know. Guilt is terrible. It's awful because there's so many levels of guilt. Guilt, I'm not doing enough. Guilt, I'm not good enough. Guilt, past guilt of whatever event whatever relationship you had with this older person. It's just so many different layers. And most of us growing older, we spend the rest of our lives getting over what happened to us when we were kids. So that guilt is just just tends to carry on and on and on, sort of like a ball going down the mountain. It just collects and collects and collects until it just breaks apart. But I think with Stoicism, just realizing the importance of yourself, realizing that, in lesson after lesson, there's almost always the same type of education. It's almost the same, like, okay, acceptance and respect, not only for the situation, not only for the other person, but for yourself as well. Putting yourself in the equal as the other person. So the guilt is very difficult, I think, to overcome. Friend of mine was just, her mom just passed away last year, and her mother was extremely angry that she had gone into a nursing home environment, but there was no other option for her because of her condition. She needed 24/7 medical care. And when my friend would go to visit her mother would literally throw things at her at the door, just throw things. My friend, out of guilt, would sit in the lobby at the nursing home and wait 2, 3 hours for her mother to calm down before she would go back in because of the guilt that she felt of putting her mother in the nursing home and not feeling good enough to take care of her mother, which she wasn't a nurse. How could she possibly medically take care of her mother? It was logically, it didn't make any sense, but the guilt overrode all of that. So how do you, yeah, your question, how do you combat that? How do you overcome that? I think the only way to do it is to realize that you are as important as that other person. And I think Stoicism helps to give you that resilience or the lessons in endurance, over the situations. It doesn't change the situation, things happen. But now, how are you going to react to it? And then what is the outcome of that reaction?
It's interesting because then we actually think that we should have had more control over a situation than we actually have. So we should have been able to change it, or we should have been able to fix this.
I
When in
know, but
when in reality, a lot of those things are things outside of our control that we start assuming guilt for. How do
yes.
we do that?
And I mean, how many of us even are prepared for that? There's no class for it. We don't go through training, not like driver education. There's nothing like that that prepares you. That would be a very interesting aspect, I think, of occupational therapists to get into that aspect of beginning that training process, in the 50s, when people are in their 50s and 60s or whatever, because I think it's such an important lesson to be taught to so many. If you go sign up for whatever insurance you're getting when you retire, then, you should also have this training as well.
Well, it's interesting because when we think about retirement planning, we only ever discuss it from a financial perspective, usually.
Hmm.
We're now starting to talk a little bit about housing, but as occupational therapists, we need to talk about it in that whole concept of
Right.
occupation, roles, habits, routines, and how they change and support well aging and
Exactly.
how they don't. And there's so many components of that that
I
we as
know.
OTs can get into and should be doing,
I
right?
know.
And we talk about that in our Home Safety Pros and chat group about offering pre-retirement classes that focus on roles, habits, routines, preparing for, you know, um, My
Perfect.
ex-husband was an engineer on the trains, and we literally saw in that the moment those guys stopped work and retired, they were dead within a year because they
Ah,
had no other routines. They
right,
had all of these weird shift work components and
right.
unhealthy lifestyle things. And I saw that working in assisted livings too. People would just sit there and sit in front of the TV, and then your whole quality of life goes very different than if you yes.
Right.
um
Right.
I
And
wanted
not just physically, but emotionally
oh,
too.
cognitively and everything else as
Everything.
well, right? I
Right.
want to move back a little bit to like complex home mods and some of these components, because in that area, we collaborate with contractors, designers, funders. And I'm thinking with that again, how would a Stoic stance help us as OTs navigate those stakeholder conflicts, delays, funding denials, not understanding what OT is, all of those components?
Yeah, that is the funding denials are horrific. It's one of the reasons why I had such a difficult time, you know, the last few years of OT here in America, at least, funding changed dramatically. And it was so frustrating knowing that this patient could do well with, you know, 10 more weeks of treatment or this particular equipment, but they just couldn't afford it and insurance wasn't going to pay for it. And it was devastating. As a therapist, it's always devastating when you can't give what you know you can give, or what
Don't worry. I have family members in other systems and it's not any better. So
it's,
it's
well, then worldwide. Yeah, it's frustrating. It's frustrating.
well, and
But
I think
anyway,
that's
but
where that age proofing and thinking about it and planning for retirement
that's
and
right.
looking at anticipating those things, or even our own health issues is
Exactly.
one part of it. But I'm going back again to like thinking about as therapists, identifying things that we can't change, but things that we can, and applying those Stoic principles even into how we act or
Exactly. So when you're working with a contractor or when you're working with insurance or funding, whenever you're working and you hit a block, that this contractor isn't doing what they're supposed to do, or there's a 4 week delay, or, the funding collapsed or whatever, again, it's the same thing. It's accepting that it happened. You can't control that thing that happened. But now, how are you going to react to it? Are you just going to stomp your feet, get angry, get annoyed? Not do anything, worry about it. No. Now, the next step, you start over again. You look for another contractor, you look for other funding, and you try to work as much as you can with the client, with the patient in that process. Keeping them informed of everything that's happening, I think is so very important because then they are in on that journey with you, or you are on that journey with them. And keeping it as a team effort, I think is very important. So if they know that the contractor, isn't going to do what they're going to do, or it's a 2 week delay because supplies haven't come in or whatever, they need to know that as soon as you know that. I think that's so important. But again, it's the same concept when I think that can be applied to everything in life. You know, what has happened has happened. I can't change it, but how am I going to react to it? How am I going to continue from here on? And instead of focusing on the past, well, he did this, she did that, that happened here, that happened. Okay, that's done. That's past. Now what? Starting from square one here. It's difficult because I think human nature, we're reactive instead of proactive. And changing that mindset or changing that habit is not easy. But it does work. I mean, it really does. It helped me so much get over my husband's passing, and just to move forward, move on.
it's interesting because I'm just reflecting as you were saying that on things that I've said recently, even it's like, well, that's happened. We can't change that. What we can change is how we respond and what we do going forward from here. I think that's part of it. Um, as we look at wrapping this up, I was thinking about what do you hope that OT practitioners, particularly those that focus on home mods, will do differently after reading your book or hearing this conversation?
Oh, I hope that they think out of the box. I hope that they can create the tools like the workbooks or spreadsheets or, as I said, meditation tapes or videos or, resources. If they could become experts on particular products, they could. I hope that they think out of the box so that when they walk into someone's home, they do their assessment, they do the physical assessment, they instruct the caregiver how to transfer and maybe food related items or some products. I don't know, whatever it is needed in that home. But then I hope they take a step forward and go the next level to give just a little bit more by doing all those things that I mentioned for the caregiver and for the patient as well. I mean, if you're taking care of the caregiver, then that caregiver is taking care of the patient. It becomes an entire circle. Because otherwise, you're just going in every week or two, three times a week to treat that patient. But then as soon as you leave, you don't know what's going on, what's happening now. The, the result could be that you're just spinning your wheels as far as the therapy process. So why not include the caregiver in that therapy to build it? To help the patient be all that they can be, but at the same time to give the caregiver the tools that they need so that they don't lose themselves in the situation, so that the situation itself doesn't turn, toxic or resentful, or that they don't have that guilt, which is just so common. I mean, it's going to be there. There's no getting rid of it. But now, how do you deal with it? What do you do with it? I, I
So,
think I think OTs can be so much more than what they currently are, or at least what the systems allow them to be. Let's put it that way.
well, and I think there's some freedom there if we were thinking outside of the box too. I think the system in some places isn't as rigid as we have anticipated or think it is. I want to just go, if we have a solo caregiver listening now from their kitchen, what would be one encouragement or stoic reminder you would offer to them?
Oh, I would say, um, well, one, realize the amazing skills that you have as an OT and look around, not only physically, but at the emotional issues that are happening in that house and think about how can you contribute to help with that? What can you do? It could just be providing a list of counselors or a list of support groups in the area. It could be, just tapping in with another OT or that may have already dealt with a patient like that. And what did they do? It may be providing a tool, like a voice activated device that the person can put into someone's room so that they can go and spend 10, 15 minutes in their own room and just chill and relax. It could be so many things. Just include the caregiver in the assessment as much as you possibly can for whatever their needs may be. Maybe
Yeah,
even
that.
provide some kind of an initial questionnaire. I don't know.
Oh, I was just thinking there is quite a few different questionnaires on caregiver burden, and I'm just thinking about what a reminder this is to incorporate that and to understand that component piece, but also to think about this from the perspective of our own burnout as therapists as well. I mean, that
Yes.
that piece just got to me. Well, thank you so much. I was
Uh,
excited to have you join us for this conversation.
Oh, Sue, I am so delighted. I really am. When you reached out and asked, and I was just blown away. I said, "Yes, absolutely. I would love to tell you whatever I have to tell you." Sure. No problem. Yes. Yeah, everyone can go to the stoiccaregiver.com. I have everything there. I'm having a lot of fun with the podcasts there. As I'm learning, well, look, the best way to learn is to teach, right?
Yes,
So yeah, so
you
that's
have
that's
you definitely have to understand and explore it more. All right,
that's right.
thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.